Arrudatitan. Arruda's giant. That name, it just paints a picture, doesn't it? Something massive.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're getting into today, Arrudatitan maximus.
An extinct Titanosaur sauropod. One of those huge, long-necked dinosaurs. This one from Brazil.
That's the one. And our look today is, well, it's built on the scientific research from when it was first named back in 2011.
Right.
Through some rethinking, you could say, until it got its own unique genus name in 2021.
So its identity kind of evolved over time.
Exactly. It's a great example of how science works, New finds, better analysis, our understanding shifts.
Okay. So our mission, for you listening, is to really unpack Arrudatitan. We want to get the key facts straight.
Yeah, what made it distinct, how it was found, and sort of where it fits in that huge Titanosaur family.
Basically, give you a solid grasp of this Brazilian giant. Okay, let's dive in. Where did this story even begin, the discovery?
It starts back in 1997, Candido Rodrigues, Brazil. Ademir Freire and his nephew, Luiz Augusto dos Santos Freire, were out in a field.
Just stumbled upon it.
Seems like it. And crucially, they knew it might be important. Fossils. So they did the smart thing.
Which was?
They got in touch with a paleontologist, Antonio Celso de Arruda Campos. It really shows how vital local discoveries can be.
Definitely. So a potentially huge find reported by local people.
Yeah.
What happened next? Did the scientists swoop in?
Well, the Museo de Paleontologia de Monte Alto, the local paleontology museum, they took charge of the excavation.
Okay.
And they carefully collected what we now call the holotype. That's the key specimen used to describe the species.
A benchmark, basically.
Exactly. And that collection process, it took a bit of time, about a year, between 97 and 98.
So found in 97, collected over the next year. When did the wider scientific world hear about it?
The first proper mention in the literature was in 2001, Santucci and Bertini.
Oh, okay.
And interestingly, they also noted other finds nearby. Teeth from crocodilomorphs, ancient croc relatives, and theropods, meat-eating dinosaurs.
Gives you a picture of the neighborhood, doesn't it?
It does, but they specifically mentioned no bite marks on the Arrudatitan bones they found.
Interesting. So predators were around, clearly, but this specific animal, maybe it wasn't taken down by one, or at least not in a way that marked these particular bones?
Seems that way from the evidence we have.
And I see Fernando Novas mentioned it later, in 2009, before the official naming.
Yeah, Novas commented briefly on the holotype, mostly just noting how big it was.
So even then, its size was making waves.
Definitely. It was clear this was a significant find. Even before it had its full name, it sort of built anticipation.
Which leads us perfectly to the dinosaur itself. Arruda's giant. How giant are we talking? And when did it live?
We're talking Late Cretaceous period.
Yeah.
Specifically, the Campanian to Maastrichtian ages. So right near the end of the dinosaurs.
Okay. And the size?
Based on that holotype, the estimate is up to about 15 meters long. That's roughly 49 feet.
15 meters. That's substantial.
It is. And get this, the left femur, the thigh bone, it measures 1.55 meters, just over 5 feet long itself.
Wow. A thigh bone taller than me.
Puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
It really does. So from this 15-meter giant, what bones do we actually have? It wasn't a complete skeleton found, I assume.
No, not at all. Complete skeletons are incredibly rare, especially for these giants. The holotype, its catalog number is MPMA 12-000197.
Right.
It's a collection of parts, some neck vertebrae fragments, too, from the back of the neck, bits of the back vertebrae, the dorsals,
Okay.
parts of nine-tail vertebrae, the caudals, some neck ribs, back ribs, 7 partial cervicals, 12 partial dorsals.
So bits and pieces from all over the body, really.
Pretty much. 8 chevrons, those are bones under the tail, a piece of the shoulder blade, the scapula, some arm bone fragments.
Yeah, and the leg bones. You mentioned the femur.
Yep, that big left femur, and part of the right one, too. Also the left ischium, that's part of the hip, and some other bits they couldn't quite place.
Quite a lot to work with, even if it's fragmented. Enough to build a picture.
Definitely. Oh, and there's also one other bone assigned to it, an isolated middle tail vertebra, MPP 248.
Okay. And the sources mentioned it was relatively gracile for a titanosaur. What does that actually mean? Gracile sounds dainty. Not a word I usually associate with titanosaur.
Yeah, maybe not dainty. But gracile here means it wasn't as heavily built, as robust or stocky as some other titanosaurs we know.
So still massive, but maybe proportionally slimmer.
Exactly. Compared to some of the real tanks, it had a somewhat lighter build, which is interesting in itself.
How so? What might that suggest?
Well, it could imply maybe slightly different movement.
Yeah.
Perhaps a bit more agility than its bulkier relatives, maybe differences in feeding strategy or how it dealt with its environment.
Fascinating. It shows there wasn't just one way to be a giant sauropod.
Precisely. Lots of variation even within the titanosaurs.
Okay, let's track this classification story then. You mentioned a change. So it wasn't always Arrudatitan.
No. When Santucci and de Rudecampos first formally described it in 2011, they placed it in the existing genus Aeolosaurus.
As a new species within that group.
Correct. They named it Aeolosaurus maximus. The maximus obviously referring to its large size. That was the initial idea.
Eulosaurus maximus. Okay. But you said doubts emerged pretty quickly.
Yeah, even around the same time, maybe slightly before the formal description actually hit the press, a study by Martinelli and some colleagues came out.
What did they find?
They looked closely at the tail vertebrae, the caudals, of what would become the A. maximus holotype, and they noted features that seemed, well, different from the other known Aeolosaur species.
So even back then, flags were being raised.
Sort of. They suggested it might belong to a related but distinct group. They tentatively called it an indeterminate Aeolosaurin, basically, part of the wider Aeolosaurin family, but maybe not Aeolosaurus itself.
Okay, so the seeds of doubt were sown early on. What happened after that?
Well, over the next decade, more studies started looking at titanosaur relationships, and a couple of key ones, one by Silva and colleagues in 2019, another by Heschen-Leitner and colleagues in 2020. They both, sort of independently, ran analyses that showed Aeolosaurus maximus didn't really cluster neatly with the other Aeolosaur species. The anatomical details just didn't quite fit when they crunched the numbers.
So the evidence was mounting that it was something different.
Exactly. Science in action. You know, more data, refined analyses, leading to a clearer picture.
And that led to the big change in 2021.
Precisely. Silva and the team, building on all this work, formally proposed the new genus Arrudatitan.
Keeping the species name Maximus.
Yes, so it became Arrudatitan maximus, it needed its own genus, and that genus name, Arrudatitan,
Arruda's giants,
is a really nice tribute to Antonio Celso de Arruda-Campos, the paleontologist who was contacted back in '97, recognizes his key role.
That's really fitting, acknowledging the people involved. So Arrudatitan stands on its own now. Where does it sit in the bigger dinosaur family tree? Who are its relatives?
Okay, so phylogenetically, that's the study of evolutionary relationships. It's definitely a titanosaur.
Right, the big group.
Then, within that, it's part of Lithostrotia, a major subgroup of advanced titanosaurs. And even more specifically, it belongs to the tribe Aeolosaurini.
Which makes sense, given its history with the Aeolosaurus.
Exactly. The 2021 paper by Silva and colleagues included a cladogram that's like the evolutionary tree diagram.
Yeah, showing the branching relationship.
Right, and it lays out their interpretation of where Arrudatitan fits.
Okay, so looking at that tree, who's its closest kin?
Well, it's a little complex, as these things often are. Some of their analyses suggested it forms a sister relationship with another titanosaur called Punatitan.
Meaning they're each other's closest relative in that specific tree.
In that version, yes. But other analyses in the same study showed a slightly different picture.
Oh.
In those, Arrudatitan was maybe more closely related to a slightly larger group that included Punatitan and the two main Aeolosaurus species, A. ryanogrinus and A. cauloapensis.
So it's definitely in that tight-knit group with Punatitan and Aeolosaurus, but the exact branching order might vary depending on how you analyze the data?
That's a good way to put it. It highlights that figuring out these precise relationships is ongoing work. New fossils or different analytical methods can tweak the tree.
Makes sense. What about other neighbors on the cladogram? Slightly more distant cousins.
The analysis also places it in context with other groups. For instance, Rhynchosauria, that includes dinosaurs like Rhynchosaurus and Melanosaurus.
Okay.
And it's shown alongside other members of its own tribe, Aeolosaurini, like Arrudatitan, Gondwanatitan, Bravosaurus, Trigonosaurus.
Wow, quite the South American lineup.
It really is. And its position relative to Odosaurus is also considered. It all helps map out the diversity within this major titanosaur branch in South America.
So untangling the family ties is clearly a work in progress.
Absolutely. It's dynamic. Every new piece of evidence helps refine the picture. Arrudatitan is a really important piece in that puzzle of late Cretaceous South American giants.
Which brings us nicely to the bigger picture. Why is Arrudatitan important beyond just being another dinosaur name?
Well, its discovery and really all the fossils coming out of the Adamantina Formation in Brazil, it's hugely significant.
Why that formation specifically?
It's just turned out to be incredibly rich in fossils from the late Cretaceous, especially titanosaurs. It tells us South America, particularly this region of Brazil, was a real hotspot for these massive herbivores right before the end.
Painting a picture of that ancient ecosystem.
Exactly. And Arrudatitan adds another data point, another unique type of giant roaming that landscape.
And what about the story of its reclassification? From Aeolosaurus to Arrudatitan, does that tell us something broader?
Oh, absolutely. It's a perfect illustration of the scientific process, really. How science is self-correcting.
How so?
Well, the initial classification, Aeolosaurus maximus, was a hypothesis based on the knowledge at the time, but as more evidence came in, as analytical methods got better, that hypothesis was tested.
And it didn't quite hold up.
Right. So it was revised. Creating the new genus Arrudatitan reflects a more accurate understanding based on the accumulated data. It's not about being wrong initially, it's about refining our knowledge as we learn more.
A constant process of improvement. I like that.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the Adamantina Formation having other giants. There was another one mentioned, Australoposidon magnificus. How does Arrudatitan stack up against that one?
Ah, yes. Australoposidon, another truly massive titanosaur from the same time and place, roughly.
Also from the Adamantina.
Yes. And while both were huge, the current thinking is that Australoposidon might have been even larger and definitely more robustly built than the relatively gracile Arrudatitan.
So two different styles of giant living side by side.
Seems like it. Which is fascinating from an ecological perspective, isn't it? How did these two enormous but differently built herbivores share the same environment? Did they eat different things, occupy slightly different niches?
Lots of questions there.
For sure. Having finds like both Arrudatitan and Australoposidon really enriches our view of that late Cretaceous world in Brazil.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the key takeaways on Arrudatitan maximus for everyone listening.
All right. Discovered in Brazil, lived in the late Cretaceous.
Big animal, estimated around 15 meters long.
Yep, with that very long femur. But also noted for being relatively gracile, or slenderly built, for a titanosaur.
And it had that interesting classification journey, started as Aeolosaurus maximus, but later recognized as its own distinct genus, Arrudatitan.
A tribute to Arruda campos. And phylogenetically, it fits within the Aeolosaurini tribe, closely related to Punatitan and the Aeolosaurus species, though the exact branching is still being fine-tuned.
It really is a great story of discovery and evolve in science.
It truly is.
So here's something to chew on. Thinking about that relatively gracile build of Arrudatitan, what might that really imply about its life? Could it have moved differently, maybe faster than the bulkier titanosaurs? Did it browse on different types of vegetation, perhaps?
Or maybe it faced different predator pressure. It's all speculation, but interesting speculation.
And considering the Adamantina Formation keeps giving us these amazing fossils, what else might be waiting out there? What future finds could shed more light on Arrudatitan, its relatives, and the world of these South American giants?
That's the exciting part, isn't it? There are definitely more pieces of this prehistoric puzzle still buried, waiting to be discovered.